Hi, welcome to the Hope and Healing with Terri podcast. I'm your host, Terri Donahoo. I believe we all have a story to share. Some of us have stories of love and acceptance, others have stories of hurt and anger. No matter what your story is, I'm so glad you're here. In John 13:34, Jesus tells us to love one another as he has loved us. He loves us with compassion and grace, no matter where we've been in life. Join me as we explore hope, healing, and faith together. So, today's topic on Hope and Healing with Terri is hope and healing through generational trauma. So, a couple months ago, my niece texted me and my sister and said, "You have to read the book. It ends with us." Because the movie's coming out and we need to go see it. And I was like, okay, I had never heard of the book. I had never heard of the movie. Um, I'm in grad school. I don't really have time for all of that, right? But I did take my son to see Twisters, which he was so excited about. So I took my son to see Twisters and I saw a preview for the movie and I was like, oh my gosh, that does look good. Now, based on the preview and the name of the movie, I kind of put it together that it is about generational trauma. However, that was just my assumption. I did not go explore it until the movie came out. When the movie came out, my husband and I went and saw it. He was one of the very few men in the packed theater who went to see this movie. Now, the movie, okay, I have a question for you real quick. Do you prefer to watch the movie first or read the book first? So I did a little survey and I found that most people actually prefer to read the book first. I actually prefer to watch the movie first. So when Ashley was like, read the book, I was like, I don't know if I want to. Well, um, I decided I would watch the movie first. Now, in the comments, if you're watching this on YouTube, tell me, would you prefer to watch the movie first or read the book? And if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, go on Instagram and leave me a DM telling me which you prefer. Now, I prefer to watch the movie first because I feel like the book has greater detail. And so, since it has greater detail than the movie, I find the movie boring. Now, other people like to read the book first, per them, because they like to imagine the character however they want before putting an actor with that character. So, makes sense. So, anyway, we went to see the movie. I have not read the book first. I did try to start it, but I just don't have time. So, anyway, let me know what you prefer. Now, I did watch the trailer again before starting the podcast because I do not want to give you any spoilers. I do not want to ruin the book or the movie for anybody who wants to go watch it because it really is good. It has a slow start, but it's good. Now, it has a slow start because you kind of have to build the characters. You have to know who they are before you can get to the actual storyline, right? So the story starts with Lily. She's the main character. And then you also see where she meets Ryle. And she meets Ryle after her dad's funeral. So her dad dies, and then she meets him. Now, 70% of people are going to experience some type of trauma in their lifetime. Okay. And there's multiple types of trauma. Now, we all process or handle this trauma differently. And the younger you are when it happens, for instance, if you are a child, it's going to be typically harder to process and handle this trauma. So, for instance, a child does not have the emotional capacity to understand what happened, nor do they have the reality to comprehend or understand what's going on or what happened. So, that affects how they're processing trauma. Um, and you'll see why I told you that when you watch the movie, but that's a fact. It's just harder. You can even have two people. Have you ever noticed how two people can see the exact same thing and see it very differently? For instance, a train wreck. Okay, we'll just use that. If someone sees it, they may see it differently. That same if you have two people that we'll say siblings that grew up in the same home, they may not have the same view of everything. And that's because we're all a little different. We all see things differently, things happen differently. Even being raised in the same home with the same parents does not mean you were raised the same. Something could be different. So, something to think about. Um, if you or someone you know has experienced trauma and you both see it differently, there's factors that go into that, okay? So, trauma can be something that happened one time. It can be an accident. It can be seeing a loved one die. That could be a one-time trauma that you see. Traumas can be something that happened multiple times. Child abuse is an example of multiple traumas. Chances are, if a child is abused, it wasn't just one time, it was an ongoing event. Um, Living in poverty and the effects of poverty, that can be an ongoing traumatic event, not just a one time thing. Okay. So, again, your history shows how you're going to handle that trauma. So the movie kind of starts off telling us a little bit about Lily, Ryle, and Atlas. You're not really going to hear a lot about Atlas on the podcast, but you can see him in the movie or in the book. Okay. So it kind of talks about it. Now, if you have a child who has experienced some type of trauma, early intervention is the best thing that you can do for that child, or even for yourself. The sooner something happens and you work through processing it, the better you're going to be able to work through it. And maybe you can process it on your own. Some people can. A lot of people are going to need a coach or even a therapist to help them process it. So do what you need to do. Now, a trauma can be something that you have personally experienced, but it can also be something that you saw. You saw somebody else get hurt. Or trauma can even be something somebody shared an account with you, something that happened to them. For instance, someone who was abused shared their abuse with you, that can be traumatic for you. So, based on all of that, the fact that trauma can happen to you, you can hear it or you can witness it, no wonder 70% of our population has experienced trauma. Okay. So, we're kind of talking a little bit today about generational trauma, or you may hear it said as intergenerational trauma. Basically, all that means is that it was passed down from one generation to the next. Child abuse is something that is often passed down. Like if you grew up in an abusive home, if you had neglectful parents, which is the most common form of child abuse, and then you have children and you're neglectful. You don't mean to be, but that's normal to you. Like that's what you grew up with, that's what you saw, that's what feels normal. Um, so it may be hard to break that cycle of physical abuse, neglect, even sexual abuse, that's something that can go on from generation to generation. And someone looking in from the outside, they know that that is not normal. Like that is not how families should be. But that doesn't mean the person growing up in that realizes that. They may not, or they might realize it, but it's so hard to end that cycle that they don't know how to get out of it. Okay. One of my favorite lines from the movie, which it's said in the trailer, so I'm going to share it with you, but is Lily says to Ryle, if you had a daughter and the man who loved her hurt her, what would you say to her? You guys, this line is impactful. This line shows that it is not okay. This line is putting into perspective what is happening. She wants him to see if he has a daughter and the man that she loves is hurting her, how's he going to respond? Because it's one thing for a man to hurt his wife or girlfriend, it's another thing for them to see somebody else hurt their child. So that's why she's saying it's ending with her. Okay. She doesn't want her daughter to see that, but she's telling him that. So in this instant, Lily is working to break that cycle. She's saying it ends with us. She's witnessed it. She's lived it. She's living it now. And she's not willing for her daughter to grow up in that same environment. So she's saying it ends with us. Now, the person who breaks generational trauma, and that can be hard, especially depending upon what the trauma is. It can be an environmental trauma. Again, we'll go back to poverty, the way that you were raised, things that you saw or witnessed in the neighborhood or area where you grew up. There's so many things that can affect trauma. And so it makes it harder to break that trauma. Okay. But the person who steps up and is the first to break that trauma, they are showing extensive courage and strength in doing that because it's not easy. it's going to be hard. And so it's going to take that strength. It's going to have to take that person who's willing to step up and say, it ends with us. It's not going to continue. I don't want my children to see the same or be raised the same. Okay. So there's a thing that most people probably don't know about called epigenetics. So epigenetics are basically anything that has happened to you affects your DNA. So it kind of helps pass it down. So it's kind of like sitting on your DNA. It's kind of like a set of instructions for them, but it's a way of passing down that trauma. So an example for this would be maybe you have a parent who was abused, but you don't know that, but it still affects you. Okay. So that is something where generational trauma can come in and maybe you don't even know it's happening, but it still affects you because it's kind of in your DNA. Okay. I know it sounds weird, but there's different ways that trauma can affect you. Trauma can affect your health, your overall health. It can affect your relationships, how you relate to other people. It can affect your career, your job, any of that thing. It can affect your faith. So a lot of people who have gone through some type of trauma experience, they blame God. Where were you? Why weren't you here? How did you let this happen to me? Um, but you know what? God hates sin just like the rest of us. We live in a fallen, broken world where bad things happen. And I know it's terrible to say that, but we all know it's true. Bad things happen. We have this thing called free will. God gives us free will to make choices for ourselves. And I'm not saying if you did something, you caused that bad thing to happen to you, but somebody made a choice and somebody was a bad person. And I know it's hard not to blame God, but He's walking beside you. He hates sin too. He hates what happened to you. Okay. So John 11:35. The verse is Jesus wept. Maybe you grew up hearing this verse. I know I did. It's a great Bible trivia verse. What is the shortest verse in the Bible? Jesus wept. But have you ever stopped to think, what does this verse mean? I didn't until recently. So in the Bible, if you look at the context of it, Lazarus is a friend of Jesus and he has died. His sisters, Mary and Martha, are very sad. Their brother died. So Jesus is there and he's talking to Mary, and she's sad because her brother died. And in this instant is when Jesus wept. Now, some people will tell you he wept because Lazarus died. But here's the deal, Jesus knew Lazarus wasn't dead. Jesus knew Lazarus was coming back. God was saving him. Mary didn't know that. Jesus wept. Jesus cried and wept with Mary because she is his friend and she was hurting. So when we're hurting, he's hurting with us. So in that instance, he's weeping because the people there are weeping. He's feeling their pain. He feels our pain. And so he's with us in these situations because God wants to be relational with us. He cares about us. He does not leave us nor forsake us, no matter what is going on in our life. Um, if you're a believer in God, maybe sometimes you feel like he's distant. I know in times in my life when I have felt like he's distant, I was the one who was distant. I was the one who was not coming to him, praying, talking to him. So, you know, but Jesus loves us. He does not want us to hurt. He does not allow it to happen. I will tell you the enemy came to kill, steal, and destroy. So if somebody comes and allows that hurt to happen, that's who it is. It is not Jesus. That's just my opinion. Um, but the Bible talks a lot about lament. Okay. Maybe you've heard about it, maybe you haven't. But lament is when people are really sad. They're really upset. They talk to God. They are hurt. They're confused. They go to God and they tell him how they feel. They cry out. They ask questions. They complain even. When you are hurting, that is a great thing to take to God because we don't want to walk through that hurt by ourselves. We want someone we can trust to walk through it with us. I want someone I can trust to walk through it with me. And I turn to God and I will go to him with lament and I will cry out. You guys, it is not a sin to be angry with God. It is not a sin to question God. It is not a sin to go and take all your hurt, all your frustration, and cry out to God. In fact, he can handle it. He is someone that we can trust. He is someone that is not going to go gossip about us or hurt us in any way. He can be there with us through the tough times. In fact, he wants to walk with us. He can handle our grief. He can handle our anger. He can handle our questions. He wants a relationship with us. And I know for me, I can only speak for myself. When I go through bad things, that is where I want to be. I want to be talking to God because that's where I feel strength and comfort, and that's where I get hope. So I hope that you can feel that. Now, if you want to end generational trauma, I always say go to God. But you know what? That's not easy for everyone. Not everyone believes in God. Not everyone understands God. And sometimes you need someone face to face with you, right? So if you want to end generational trauma, talk to a coach or a therapist, okay? So there are things that can be generational trauma to you that you didn't live, but you lived the effects of it. So, instance, something that happened to your parents, you didn't live whatever happened to them, but you are living the effects of it. So, effects of trauma can be biological, behavioral, emotional. It can be relational consequences, like maybe they don't know how to relate to you. So, trauma can be transmitted from one generation to the next. You maybe have a parent who's hyper vigilant, a parent who uses drugs to numb the pain. Okay. Maybe they isolate. Maybe they don't talk to you. Maybe you have a parent who explodes with anger. They have angry outbursts or they're pessimistic about the future. These are all things that impact children. So if you're living in a home like this, that generational trauma is impacting you even though you did not live it. So again, if you want help working through the effects of generational trauma so that you're not passing it on to the next generation, let it end with you and you can contact a coach or a therapist. So a coach or a therapist, they can help you develop new patterns that disrupt generational repetition. So when patterns are happening in your brain, they can basically rewire. The brain is amazing, you guys. If you know anything about neuroscience, the brain has plasticity and it can rewire itself. So you can put new transmitters, I'll say, to rewire your brain to get rid of the generational trauma and change that repetition, change that pattern for you and your family. So, another thing that you can do to kind of help with generational trauma is explore the trauma history. What happened? Why did it happen? So, I'm going to use again the movie as an example. Ryle didn't set out to hurt Lily. And I am not making any excuses for him because abuse is not okay. Domestic violence is not okay. Child abuse is not okay. Seriously, get help. If you or somebody you know is in that situation, reach out and get help. It's not okay. And I'm never going to say that it is. But something happened that caused Ryle to react in the way that he does. Something happened in the movie, you'll know, that caused Lily to react in the way that she does. So he didn't set out to hurt her, but when you understand what happened, you kind of have a different view to help you heal. Okay. Now, I hope everybody has a choice. We have a choice to heal or continue down the painful path. Okay. So, again, we have a choice. We can kind of try to work through that generational trauma, or we can continue down that painful path that we already know and that we already live. So in the movie, when Lily asked Ryle the question, what would you say to your daughter if she came to you and said the man she loves is hurting her? I hope that opened his eyes, and I hope that brought him towards healing. I hope it helped him realize that he needs help. Okay. So I hope in in that instant, it clicks in his head that, oh, I need to do something. I need to do something to help me be a better parent and a better person for my daughter. Because, you're raising the next generation. So Lily explored her trauma history and she wanted better for her daughter. She did not want her daughter to grow up seeing what she saw. She did not want her daughter to have the life that she had. So she used that impactful statement to change the generational pattern. Okay. She's saying it ends with us. It's not happening anymore. It is done. We are done with this. My daughter deserves better. My daughter does not need to see that. I don't want her raised like that. So she's making that choice. So here's the thing. If you want to work through generational trauma, go to God with lament. If you've been through trauma, any type of trauma, generational or ongoing, or you're the first one to have in your family to experience, take it to God with lament. Take it to Him with your questions. Take it to Him as someone who's going to listen to you. Take Him your hurt, your pain, all the things. So, we have guilt and we have shame, okay, as human nature. That's what we do to ourselves. But God, He gives us forgiveness and He sets us free. We don't have to live with that guilt. We don't have to live with that shame. We don't have to live with anger. So, a relationship with God equals a life of freedom. You don't have to live in bondage to sin or hurt. He gives us grace. It's time for us to start giving ourselves grace and give ourselves forgiveness for whatever happened. Because whatever happened to you was not your fault. Okay. Um, Sometimes life just sucks and we go through bad things, but you are not what happened to you. You are an amazing person who has overcome hurt and pain. Trauma can bring anxiety, depression, and pain, but God gives us hope, healing, and love. I hope that you find that healing and love through Christ. If you have any questions on that, I'm happy to go over that with you. So thank you for joining me for this episode of Hope and Healing with Terri. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, share it with somebody else if you think they would get something out of it. And I will see you back for our next podcast. Bye and have a great day.